Welcome to Wednesday Bible class, and Jesus encounters the Bethesda Paralytic. This is brought to us by John the Apostle. He used to be a fisherman. Now he's writing the gospel. And like 90% of John, this is a unique story. Can't find it anywhere else in the Bible, so there's no parallel stories to read. Jesus has come to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals, one of the Jewish feasts. The events in this chapter of John, which is John 5, begin an intense persecution of Jesus by the Jews in Jerusalem. Jesus did not stay in Jerusalem. He stayed up north around the Sea of Galilee. But he would go to Jerusalem for these feasts, and that's when he had these conflicts with who John calls the Jews. The man has been lying by the pool for 38 years. That's longer than many people even lived in this time frame. He's lying near the pool. He's surrounded by other sick people, other people that are blind and lame, and he doesn't initiate the conversation. Jesus comes up to him. Jesus initiates this encounter, and he's showing that he's still coming to seek and to save the lost. This man has long-term disability. Jesus asked him a probing question: do you want to get well? And then despite the man's lack of faith, despite the man's lack of knowing who Jesus is, Jesus heals him anyway. Amazing. All right, let's read it, Jackie.
After this, a Jewish festival took place, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. By the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there is a pool called Bethesda in Aramaic, which has 5 colonnades. Within these lay a large number of the disabled, blind, lame, and paralyzed.
A large number, look at this. Let's count the colonnades. Okay, here's 1, here's 2, and then these are 2 adjacent pools, so there would be 1 back over here, that'd be 3 back by that pool, and then 1 over here, that'd be number 4. So on each side of that pool, each side of this pool, and then this one, the pass-through. That's the 5th. That's the pass-through colonnade where you can go from one pool to the other. So that kind of makes sense. John is giving us these details about the sheep gate and about the pool in case you're not familiar with this area. John really writes his gospel so that anyone in the world can read it and understand it. It's not to a particular group of people. It's to everyone, because John wants everyone to believe in Jesus. Now, immediately after these 3 verses is verse 4. Okay, wake up, y'all. Verse 4 comes after these 3. But verse 4 is what's known as a textual variant. That means it's not in all of the old copies of the New Testament or the book of John. So it's part of what's known as the majority text. It is in the King James because the King James is based upon the majority text, but it's not in most modern Bibles, which are based on the oldest texts. So the oldest and most reliable, the most closely copied to the source documents, do not contain this 4th verse, but let me read it to you. You've probably heard of it. From time to time, an angel descended into the pool and stirred the waters. As soon as the water was stirred, the first to enter the pool would be healed of his disease. So that's not in the earliest and best manuscripts of the Gospel of John. It was probably added, and this majority text that this comes from, those copies are from the 1000s to the 1400s, very late, whereas modern Bibles are based upon manuscripts that go all the way back to the 1 to 300 period. So, a big time difference between these documents. And these are all handwritten documents on all types of materials that are subject to decay. And so anyway, that's a whole nother lesson. Maybe that's what I'll teach next week next month when Pastor told me I got to make up another lesson next month. Maybe I'll talk about that. I don't know. Anyway, so some Bibles will have that verse about the angel stirring up the waters, but it was probably added later by a scribe that was trying to explain why all these people were around the pool. Okay? All right, let's keep going.
One man was there who had been disabled for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and realized he had already been there a long time, He said to him, "Do you want to get well?"
What is the obvious answer? Thank you, Debbie. What did Bartimaeus do when Jesus called him? He threw off his cloak, he jumped up, and he made his way as fast as a blind man can make his way to Jesus. But what does Jesus say? What does he say to this man? Do you want to get well? What does the man say?
"Sir," the disabled man answered, "I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. But while I'm coming, someone goes down ahead of me."
The man's excuse reveals that he's basically given up hope. He's basically saying, I don't have any way. It's impossible for me to get healed. Jesus just asked him, do you want to get well? He missed the whole question. He missed the whole question. But Jesus does not deride the man for his hyper negativity. But think about this. 38 years he's seen people get into the pool before him. 38 years he's tried to drag himself over to the pool. 38 years he's gone through this cycle of, today, oh no, somebody beat me to the water again. And it's a cycle of anticipation and then a letdown. And how long will it be again till the waters are troubled and he can try again? So he's basically just given up.
"Get up," Jesus told him. "Pick up your mat and walk." Instantly, the man got well, picked up his mat, and started to walk.
Amazing. Jesus doesn't deride him for not believing or for not knowing who he is or not even answering the question. Jesus just simply gives him another impossible command. He can't get up. He's paralyzed. Jesus gives these people impossible commands. But what did he do? He got well, and then he picked up his mat, and he started to walk. Jesus specifically tells him to pick up your mat and walk, which according to the Jewish religious leaders is work. And this has happened on the Sabbath day, wouldn't you know? And so Jesus has commanded this man to work on the Sabbath. How do you think the leaders are going to like that? Not too much. Not too much.
Now that day was the Sabbath, and so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "This is the Sabbath. The law prohibits you from picking up your mat."
But not God's law. God's law did not prevent a man from picking up his mat. God's law says, you shall not work on the seventh day. And that's all God said. And guess what? Who gets to decide what work is? You do, because you are individually responsible to God for what you do. You're not responsible to God for what people tell you to do. You're responsible to God for what you do. You have to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, Peter said. So they said, you're breaking the law. But Jesus told him to do it. And so what does he say?
He replied, "The man who made me well told me, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'"
He probably didn't want to conflict with him, so he put the blame on Jesus, which is fine.
"Who is this man who told you, 'Pick up your mat and walk'?" they asked. But the man who was healed did not know who it was, because Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there.
So how about that? He had an encounter. He had an amazing healing after 38 years, and he didn't even know who Jesus was. He didn't even know who did it. He didn't even know where Jesus was. He just said, a man told me to pick up my bed, and that's why I'm doing it. That's why I'm walking with my bed.
After this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you."
This is interesting because this kind of goes back to the old thing about the curses and the blessings. And we've already talked about when people saw, in Jesus' day, when people saw ones that were afflicted with a malady, a lot of times they would think, oh, they're cursed by God because look at them. They've got something wrong. This man's been paralyzed 38 years. He must have sinned. And Jesus seems to reinforce that because he's telling the man, stop sinning, or something worse may happen to you. What could be worse than paralyzation? I don't know. Death, maybe? I don't know. But Jesus warns him. Okay?
the man went and reported to the Jews that it was Jesus who made him well. Therefore, the Jews began persecuting Jesus because he was doing these things on the Sabbath.
All right, once again, they recognize that Jesus is breaking their laws and they don't like it. They had made these laws extra strict for one reason. Back in the Old Testament, they didn't take God seriously and they couldn't get rid of their idolatry. And so God took them out of the promised land and they lost the promised land for 70 years plus. And when they came back, God gave them the promised land again. When they came back, this group called the Pharisees arose and they said, we're not going to let that happen again. We're not going to let God take us out of the promised land. In order to make sure that we don't sin, we're going to make these rules and force the people to keep these rules, because if they keep these rules, there's no way they could break God's laws. So that's where they came up with all these rules about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. God just said, you shall not work on the Sabbath. But the Pharisees said, that means you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And that's where they came up with all those laws. And that's what they're accusing Jesus of breaking. They're accusing Jesus of breaking their laws, that they are trying to keep the nation together by keeping them in strict compliance with God's laws. But that's the main thing that set them off against Jesus. And that's the end of Jesus encounters the Bethesda paralytic. But wait a minute, Jesus encounters you. There is no cry for mercy that is too small. There is no body that is too broken. And there is no life that is too hopeless for Jesus to seek and to save. God bless you. Thanks for joining us tonight.